Thank you, Acting President, and thank you, Honourable Wilson-Tucker, for bringing this motion forward. I think it's very important that we consider data breaches and privacy of our data as being something fundamental to a free and fair society. Now, it's true that data, of course, is being leaked. It has always been leaked. There's malicious players out there, but also governments interested in the information, some for nefarious purposes and some for very beneficial purposes. The question is, can we tell the difference? And is it planned or not? It's repeatedly being let loose. And so we have systemic issues, and that's a fact. I'm happy to hear that the government is addressing this, as indeed any government should. But I'll move on to an area where I have personal experience, that's of the health data. Medical privacy is, of course, a fundamental feature of any consultation with your doctor, or indeed any healthcare provider. I do recall one case when I was working for the Department of Corrective Services, when a prisoner wanted to get some medication which would keep his mind occupied while he was doing his justly earned time. And it was refused, of course, because there was no medical indication for that. So he says, I'm going to kill myself. And I either say, listen, that's a very, very poor choice, and so I really wouldn't recommend that, and you're not getting the medication you want, and send him back to his cell. However, I did warn the SO of the unit that he was at risk, and he was put on observation to ensure that he wasn't. Well, he was seen to be laughing and smiling and very, very happy. He tried to pull a fast one on the doctor and had failed. But then he wrote his mother and said, oh, the doctor said I may as well go and kill myself, which was a complete lie. But then prisoners are not known for being the most honest people in the world anyhow. This information went around the traps of government, actually, including the AG's office, the then AG office. So a complaint came back to me that I had been acting maliciously and telling prisoners to go kill themselves. So I sent, this is here, I don't know how many people were in that. I wrote back to the director of the prison and gave an account, as I should do, of what actually happened. Now, everyone else read that reply, and I was given grief because I'd put out someone's personal medical information. Although he'd been trying to actually do me damage, and many people had said, oh, that terrible doctor, when they all found out, well, actually, the proper things had been done, there was silence, but I still had trouble because medical data had been revealed to someone who wasn't a clinician. So we hear truth being given and spread, but it was not the truth that people wanted to see because it was someone's personal data, although they had been listening to the lies and spreading the lies, and being dealt the truth was a bit too much. So here we have an example how data can be misused, privacy data can be misused to spread falsehoods. In fact, we're seeing it today with what the Trump supporters are doing very, very properly. We have here an example of the Western Australia Police Force who accessed the data from Safe WA. Now, you have to say, why were they doing that? So they shouldn't have, of course, but the data was there, and they happened to use it, although they shouldn't have. And it was absolutely the wrong precedent, but why were they trying to do that in the first place? Well, it's to catch a murderer. So I think the outcome might have been good, but the way they went about it was certainly wrong. So systemically, we ought to do something about that. That there ought to be a process whereby those who care for our well-being are able to access the data they need to solve these dangerous crimes. I'm thinking also of the issues with, say, little Cleo, who was rescued, and they found that with a whole host of data that they got. And I believe in today's paper, it turns out that the police were charged $1 million for accessing data by the telcos. It's a huge sum, and it really ought not to be the case that for identifying an abductor, a murderer, or someone who has done some serious crime, that so much money ought to be paid simply for handing over the data needed for tracking someone's cell phone, for example. Speaking of which, this little phone I have here will not use props, I understand, but every one of us carrying this phone, our position can be identified. And using Facebook, as us older people do, is one excellent way of revealing every single bit of our information to the people who control that. And here again, I'm thinking of how the election was abused in the US, how people were targeted with information, which led to the installation of a president who was utterly corrupt. And that certainly did no good to society at all. We have here the parliamentary emails which were hacked in March of 2021. The WA police officers' information was hacked. And the Perth Mint, of course, had its own issues too. So we have actually the problem in our society is that data collection is present and it's increasing. It's ubiquitous. We've got new speed cameras which are able to identify five different themes, I think. So more data is being collected there. It's very possible that we could actually be in a society right now where our every step has been recorded. Now, you might then say it's quite important we do that. I'll come back to that in a moment. But I'm looking here at the request for more permissions for the police at the border to do intrusive searches, which is all very well and good if all you want to do is to get those who are dealing with methamphetamine, but not so very good if you can extend that with one little bit of care to identifying who is a potential voter for someone you don't want to have. That's not a big step, and we ought to be very careful in how we let this information be used. So increasing the data is fine, but the bottom line is we don't have enough safeguards in place. And this is a matter, it doesn't matter who is in power, we need to actually have safeguards from both sides of the House that data is not misused. So it starts at legislation. So I could then make the claim here that by not allowing the bills to go through to the committee for review, by not allowing the amendments to be carried, the carefully thought out amendments, is a good way of actually making sure that the bills we pass are not 100% accurate. So otherwise, what we are saying is that the stuff that the PCO is putting forward to us is 100% of the time perfect. And I think anyone who says that is actually not quite in the possession of their full senses. So what we're now having, of course, is a question here of if it comes to legislation regarding data, are we doing that in the same the haphazard manner and letting bills be passed which don't actually do what we think they are doing, as in the case of safeguarding our personal data? I personally, as a member of the Legislation Committee who hasn't had one single sitting because we don't have any need, because the PCO's laws are 100% perfect, I find that actually most worrisome. Although I do appreciate the lack of work involved. Now, I have actually lived in a police state. I have been followed by KGB. My records were present in Stasi headquarters. In fact, I was interviewed by the West German secret police as to why my records, after the wall came down, why I was recognized in the Stasi information for Hansa STASI, Staatssicherheit. And so I know what it's like to be followed. I know what it's like to be observed. And it's not a nice feeling to stand there opposite a KGB officer who's got my passport in his hands, preventing me from leaving the country. It is absolutely not a nice feeling to be in a police state. But you could then say, but it's for your own safety, your own security. Now that may well be very true, but is also a very small step away from oppression. And we have to be very careful in this day and age, on both sides of the House, that we treat our data with the appropriate care and caution. Because ultimately, it's going to be about control. Now, I'll give you a story about this. One positive example. We're all aware of the intense scrutiny of everyone within China. If you've been there, there's cameras on every street corner, along every long street, and your every step is controlled. In fact, you are measured as to how much of a security risk you are. So this BBC editor lost his briefcase in a car and found out that after the taxi had gone. He goes to the police and they say, well, tough luck. He says, but I'm the chief editor of the BBC in Shanghai. So within a half an hour, they had identified the taxi driver, gone to his home and recovered him, trying to get his private documents from the briefcase. So that was a very successful use of police data. Very quick, very good. But would we like to live in that kind of a state? So we must have safeguards. We've also got a government backdoor into all these things. Don't let anyone be fooled. There are ways of finding out WhatsApp. Well, for goodness sakes, the Klan's an example of that. And the ASIO would be very keen to be aware of all our data, such that when someone is thought to be at risk of giving away state secrets, that they can be identified before our precious secrets have been given away. So it's actually a very sophisticated question. How much is too much? Where do we draw the line? How do we preserve our free and fair society of democracy, of autonomy, while at the same time ensuring that the people who deserve to be followed and identified are effectively identified by our police forces? And here I'm thinking about paedophilia, the murder cases. How do we protect ourselves with adequate security, but at the same time protect ourselves with adequate privacy?